Welcome back to the 7th and final day of Stitchmas. Hooray, we made it! Happy Christmas Eve. We have a really fun video today, and what that's going to be is making a DIY Christmas themed apron as well as some sugar cookies to go along with it. So with that said, let's get started. I'm going to be using my dress form today for all the measurements. There's no pattern pieces involved with this. We're just going to be taking 3 measurements. It's going to be very simple and very easy, so that way you can kind of follow along as well. Now, I cannot find my tape measure. We recently moved and I think it is lost someplace. So I'm going to be showing you how to do this using just a piece of ribbon, and you can mark on it in case you can't find yours either. The first measurement you want to take though is basically where you want the top of your apron to be. So you're going to measure that width, and then I'm just putting a pin where I want that to go. Next, you want to measure your waist for how far around you'd want your apron to go before you would tie it. Then you're going to mark that down, and then finally you're going to have the diagonal, which will be the edge of the top of the apron to the edge of the waist for the apron. And as you can see, I have these 3 marked on my ribbon. I used different color pins so I'd know which was which. Now for the amount of fabric you want, I used just a yard of quilting cotton that I had on hand. I thought it was a really fun design. I think you could probably get away with maybe a yard and a half, depending on how big you want your apron to be. But when you take your measurements, you could always look at it that way. This is going to be for the bottom as well as the top and the strap. So here's a very quick little drawing that I did. The bottom's going to be gathered, and then you'll have straps at both the top as well as the waist so that we can hold it on. Here's all of my fabric though, nice and laid out. So what I'm going to do is cut out the strips first. These will be basically like 2-inch strips that I'll be cutting out from this fabric. And then once you kind of cut that strip, you're going to then cut this in half, and that will give you like your straps for the top. And then you're just going to repeat this for the straps for the waist. Next, with the rest of your fabric, you're just going to cut this directly in half along that crease for wherever it was folded. One half of this will be for the bottom, and then the other half is going to be for the top of the apron. So with those measurements that you did on the ribbon, or if you had a tape measure, you're just going to mark down where the top of your apron is going to be, how wide or how long that is. And I just used chalk to kind of measure this out, and so that I would have a rough idea of like the straight line for it. So you can see that this is going to be the top of my apron, and then you're going to repeat that for whatever the waist measurement was for your apron. And then what you can see that I'm doing here is actually just doing a straight line all the way up. So we have that diagonal measurement that we still need to use, but I'm not quite sure where it's going to be going yet. So basically we're just doing the rough estimation of this is how wide it's going to be, and it's going to be somewhere within this range. So we know that we have our top, and then it's going to be somewhere along the width on the side. So then what I ended up doing was kind of putting my diagonal measurement from that point to for the top all the way down to wherever it matched for the width. And this is how you can get it for the one side, and then you can repeat this for the second side by either folding your fabric over so you get that mirror image, or you could draw out the other one on the other side. It should be the same. Once you have all of that traced out, you're just going to cut it out, and then you're going to cut a second one of these because it's going to be both the lining as well as the front of your apron. So you can see now that I have the top of my apron, both of those pieces, I have the bottom, and then I have all the straps. This is everything we're going to need to put our apron together. So it's all looking really good. You can see I have those 2 pieces, and then now what I'm going to do though is work on the straps. So I've kind of draped it on my dress form just so you could get the general idea of what this is going to end up looking like. We're going to be able to tie at the top for the neck as well as the waist. The bottom will be gathered. This is a very loose gathering, as you can tell. But what we're going to focus on now is getting those straps done. So we're just going to be sewing them up. I have folded them over hot dog style, as you can see, and I'm just going to be taking a straight seam all the way down for all 4 of the straps. So I did this in a chain stitching method, so this is very similar to what you would do in quilting. And once you kind of have that done, I just went through with my clippers and kind of separated all of them and then turned them right side out using my turning tool. And once you do that, it will be time to kind of iron and press them all nice and flat and smooth. This is going to allow us to get like a really professional finish, but also allow it to lay really nicely for your apron. So I went through and pressed all of them down, and this will also let us be able to top stitch it. So when you top stitch it, it's going to really allow it to lay and not roll or bunch up as much. So this is what all 4 look like after I ironed them, and then I just took it to the machine and top stitched. When I got down to the edge, I did kind of pick up my sewing machine and then pivoted it so I could do that second edge, but I did fold in the fabric, that way I could finish off that little edge as well. And then I just continued top stitching, so I top stitched 3 of the 4 sides. One side you're not going to be able to see, it's going to be hidden because we're going to be using that to attach it to the main apron itself. So now that we have all those straps completed, what it's time to work on now is the main top portion of our apron. So this is going to be really pretty simple. As you see, I have both those pieces, both the front as well as the lining, and I have them with right sides together. So what you're going to do with this is you're going to kind of pin up, as we're going to be sewing 3 of the 4 sides. So the longest side, where the waist is going to go, you're going to keep that open. Now you're going to take 2 of your straps, and as you can see, I left the white part of the fabric on, so that'd be actually a little easier to show here. But I'm going to be putting this right at the edge of my fabric, maybe leaving about a 1/4 inch seam allowance, folding this over, and then repeating this for the second side. So this will be at the top, and that's how we are attaching the straps for the top portion of our apron. So we're just going to be sewing all of this together so that everything lays nice and flat, and it's going to be a very simple, quick seam that will allow us to get those straps onto our apron. Now at the bottom portion of this, you're going to leave it actually open. So we're going to be taking a seam up those 3 sides and then leaving about an inch, 1.5 gap on either part. So here I am, I'm just going through pinning everything together, making sure it lays nice and flat, and I'm going to sew from where that one pin is all the way to the other side, making sure I leave that gap. Then I just went through and kind of clipped the corner so it'd be easier to turn, and just pulled this right side out. So since the straps are there, it actually made it really simple to do. And then we will eventually be top stitching this, but we're going to kind of pause on that and we'll focus on it later. So once I move those 2 straps, those will be for the waist. You can see at the top it ties really nicely together. Everything looks really pretty and I love how it's turning out. So now with the top basically sort of completed, we still need to top stitch it, but again, that's going to be like the final step. We're going to go ahead and focus on the bottom of our apron, which is using the rest of the fabric we have. So I went ahead and decided to hem this first, as I knew it was the correct length that I wanted. I just did a very easy rolled hem. You could do this in a lot of different ways. You could use a rolled hem foot, you could just iron it, you could also add bias tape if that was something you were looking to do. And then I'm just going to go ahead and do this all the way across the bottom so that we get that nice clean edge. So once the hem was done, it was time to take the gathering, or putting my sewing machine in basting, and then taking 2 basting stitches across the top of the bottom portion of the apron. So I need to have this fit where the waist of the top portion of my apron is. So go ahead and just measure that one more time, since we did take some seams and may have slightly gotten smaller. So I just used my ribbon to kind of mark how large it was going to be. And then I put a pin so that I would know the exact distance. And then this is how large I need to gather my fabric to. So I'm going to just be pulling one of the strings on either side and gathering the fabric until it is exactly that length. And then what I will be doing is putting my sewing machine back on the regular stitch length and then sewing this down so that the gathering stitches all stay exactly the same. So now I have the bottom portion of my apron mostly complete. It has the hem and it's been gathered, and then the top portion. So what I need to focus on now for this bottom portion before we attach it is the sides. So I just took a really quick rolled hem, and it ended up being like a 1/4 inch, and just folding it over once and then folding it over again on either side. This way I remove those raw edges, and it's going to look very nice and clean and neat. And then I'm just going to take that straight stitch for both sides. So here is what the bottom portion of the apron looks like now. The straight stitch is done. Everything's been hemmed. There's no more raw edges except for the top. So now we're going to go back to the top portion of our apron, and I'm going to actually press all of this out. And then I'm going to fold down that raw edge and just fold it over so that we can use that as sort of like a bias tape situation. So first though, I just pressed everything out so it'd be nice and smooth, and this will make it easier to top stitch when we do that last and final step. And then for the bottom, as you can see here, I have folded this in about, it will end up being like 3/8 inch, and I'm going to repeat this for the other side so that you have a nice clean edge. And this is going to allow us to have like a little pocket so that we can put the bottom of our apron, just kind of slide it up in there, which will then allow us to have the bottom and the top, and then we'll also be getting the straps all sewn in one step. So it's kind of a lot, and you can definitely break this up if you'd like to, but first we're just going to pin the bottom portion of our apron to the top portion. So making sure you can't see any of those raw edges, making sure that everything lays nice and flat and smooth. Just go through and use your pins to kind of pin all of this into place. Once you have that done, so you can see here that I have the bottom portion nicely pinned into the top portion, what we're going to be doing is adding the straps. So if you remember at the beginning, we left about an inch or an 1.5 inch not sewn. This is so that we could add those straps in. So we just kind of poke them in, very similar to how we did before, and I'm just going to top stitch all the way around. And once it's top stitched, it's actually complete. So let's see how it works and try to make some cookies. So I hung it here in my pantry, so I'm going to take it out. I'm going to tie it on. It tied really nicely. It feels really good. And I think now it's time to get to work and try baking some cookies to see what happens. So today's recipe, I'm just doing a really quick, simple, gluten-free sugar cookie recipe. You're gonna use about 7 tablespoons of butter. So when I took my butter out of the fridge, I like to chop it up so that it makes it a little easier since the butter does need to be softened. This just lets it be in smaller pieces so it kind of softens easier. Then you're gonna be adding 3/4 of a cup of white granulated sugar to the butter, and you're just gonna kind of let these mix and come together. You'll know when it comes together when it's nice and pale and light and fluffy. Next, you'll be adding 1 egg. Hopefully you crack your egg much better than I did. I really struggled with this egg. Normally I am much better about it, and part of the eggshell broke off. But once you kind of figure that out, you're able to then start your mixer again and let it go and have everything come together really nicely. Once it is nice and fluffy, you're going to be adding a 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder as well as 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. And then you'll be adding a little bit of salt. So for mine, I ended up using salted butter because we brought the wrong thing. So I just did like a little dash. I'll have the full link to the recipe I used though in case you're interested. Next, I added 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla and then let everything mix really nicely and come together. The final step was adding the baking flour, so I use Bob's Red Mill gluten-free 1-to-1 ratio. I find it works really well. You needed 1.5 cups of this flour, so I just put it all in there. I did put it all in at once, which sometimes can be a mess, but if you do your mixer really, really slowly, it kind of helps it from exploding everywhere. But I did have on an apron today, so even if it did explode, it wouldn't have gotten on me, and so far the apron was working out very, very nicely. Once everything has come together though, the cat decided to help the entire time, as you can see her rolling here on the floor. It is time to put these on a baking sheet. So I have my sprinkles that I'm going to be rolling them into little balls, so I used green since it was for Christmas. And you want to have either parchment paper or your greased cookie sheets. It's supposed to make 24 cookies. I ended up getting 23 because I think I made a couple a little too big. While I was doing it though, it started to snow, which was really fun. And then you're gonna put these into the oven at 350 degrees for 8 to 10 minutes. I ended up doing 5 minutes, flipped them, and then did another 4 minutes, and it came together really, really nicely. Overall, these cookies were delicious. I had so much fun making them, and it was really fun wearing my Christmas apron to make them as well. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and tell me what you want to see next. Whether this was your first video of Stitchmas or your last, thank you so much for coming with me on this journey. And from my family to yours, Merry Christmas!